Hello, and thank you for choosing this full-length, clean, historical Western romance by Kat Lynn. We are so happy to have you with us today. Before we begin, don't forget to tap the subscribe button and like and share with your friends. Your support allows us to continue sharing these sweet, heartwarming stories for free. Now, relax and get ready to travel back in time to the American frontier, where we join an adventure to find love and happily ever after. Enjoy. Copyright of Kat Lynn, The Rancher's Christmas Present by Kat Lynn, Chapter 1. New Orleans, Louisiana, 1870. Barbara sprinted out of the room like a bat out of hell, hot tears coursing down her cheeks. She could hear the pot-bellied man hot on her heels, huffing and puffing as he tried to catch up to her, but she was too fast for him. She fled down the stairs and straight into the arms of Mr. Bailey, who was manning the front desk at the hotel where she worked as a cleaner. "What is it, dear?" Mr. Bailey asked the weeping girl, but she couldn't answer as her small shoulders shook violently from her sobbing. "Come on, Barbara, tell me what has got you like this, dearest." It's the gentleman in room 24, she managed to say amid sobs. "Tell me, what has he done?" the older man asked as rage began building up inside him. This was not the first time Barbara was complaining about a male guest in one of the hotel rooms. Why wouldn't they leave the poor girl alone? "He tried to do the unthinkable, Mr. Bailey," she said, unable to look the older man in the eyes from the shame she felt. "Why did you start cleaning whilst he was in the room?" Mr. Bailey asked, though he knew that Barbara knew better than that. "No, sir. He came back in while I was cleaning and—" Her voice trailed off. She couldn't bring herself to tell the older man all the sundry details of how the man had tried to violate her. There. He didn't do anything to you, now did he?" he asked as he wrapped his arms around her, and she began to calm down. It pained him to the core whenever he saw this young girl he'd come to regard as his granddaughter in such distress. "No, sir. I bit down hard on his arm and he let go. I then ran out of the room. I could hear him running after me. Mr. Bailey, I could hear him," she whimpered. Mr. Bailey pulled away from her and looked her in the eyes. "Good for you, dear. I wish you'd bitten his whole arm off. What a coward!" "He must have turned back when he saw me," Mr. Bailey said, and Barbara smiled through her tears. Mr. Bailey had always been her friend and confidant since the day he'd picked her up from the streets when she was 16 years old. He'd then brought her to this hotel and begged the manager to give her a job. She, in turn, loved and cared for him deeply. "Why do they always do this to me? I never encouraged them or anything," she said as tears began pooling in her eyes once again. "It's not your fault, dear. Never has been. They're just rotten scoundrels who ought to know better," he answered, his heart going out to her. If only there was a way he could help her. The hotel's manager didn't care about Barbara's complaints. He knew that she was dirt poor and an orphan to boot, who couldn't afford to lose this job. Later that evening, as Barbara sat on an old, worn-out sofa chewing on a dry piece of bread in her tiny one-room apartment, she pondered her life. The wages she received at the hotel were only enough to pay for the tiny apartment and to buy a few food items that would get depleted even before she received her next check. She only had one pair of shoes that were now threatening to expose her toes, and her two dresses were full of patches from being sawn over and over with older pieces of clothes. Barbara's life had been one of suffering for as far as she could remember. She'd found herself in an orphanage at the age of 6. She was told that she'd been picked up lying next to her dead parents at their home by a concerned neighbor who'd then brought her to the orphanage. She'd been let go when she turned 15 years old, and with nowhere else to go, she'd started working in a boarding house in New Orleans. When she'd turned 16, the owner had proposed that she takes up a job at the boarding house entertaining men at night. Even at that young age, Barbara had known that that was a despicable job, and when she'd refused, the owner had promptly fired her. She'd spent some time out on the streets until Mr. Bailey saw her, felt pity for the young girl, and got her job as a cleaner at the hotel where he worked at the front desk. He'd been kind enough to hold her hand and be her shoulder to cry on. But now, almost 2 years into the job, it seemed as if it was all going to the dogs. The male guests wouldn't leave her alone. Many had propositioned her so many times, and when she'd refused, they would try to force themselves on her. What Barbara didn't understand was that she was a striking beauty with long, curly dark hair, big ocean blue eyes set on a small oval face with rosy cheeks that dimpled when she smiled, and a small, curvy figure. She was a men magnet, but she was oblivious to the fact. A mouse scrambled from one side of the room to the other, and she only stared at it unmoved. She'd seen worse things while living out on the streets. She heard the doors of the tavern downstairs bang shut, and a number of drunks stumble out onto the dark streets, howling and hollering as they disappeared into the night. I would give anything to leave this place behind, she thought wearily. The following morning at work, Mr. Bailey informed her that the bothersome guest had sneaked out of the hotel in the middle of the night. He must have been ashamed of his actions and worried that there could be repercussions. Either way, Barbara was relieved that she wouldn't be in the same building with him. That is, until another one like him showed up. She wondered how her life would have turned out had both of her parents been around. That was something she would never know, she sighed. Chapter 2. Elmo, Texas. 1870. Riley Scott shuffled into the drawing room, a stale odor of alcohol trailing behind him to the chagrin of his mother, Marie Scott. She had been waiting for him so they could have breakfast together for almost half an hour, and she was beyond livid. If there was something that Mrs. Scott abhorred, it was tardiness. "Riley, do you know how long I've sat here waiting for you?" she asked, her icy tone letting him know just how upset she was. "Relax, Mother. I'm here now, aren't I?" he growled as he pulled out a chair at the opposite side of the dining table and sat down. The stale stench of alcohol wafted over to his mother, and it was more than she could handle. "When are you going to stop this, Riley? When did you become a hopeless alcoholic?" she asked through gritted teeth. "Oh, come now, Mother. I only had a couple shots of whiskey to help me sleep," he answered, his bloodshot eyes saying otherwise. "A couple of shots, my foot. You've got to stop this, Riley. It's gone on for far too long, and I will no longer allow it," she spat, which was so unlike her. "You won't allow it any further? And what are you going to do, Mother? Lay me across your knee and spank me," he snarled, and Marie was taken aback. He'd never talked to her like that a day in his life. "Riley, what is happening to you?" she asked as she choked back tears. Riley noticed he'd gone too far and sighed resignedly. "I don't know, Mother. Maybe I'm finally losing my mind. It's so hard living without her mother. I can't bear it anymore," he answered, and the pain in his voice broke Marie's heart. She stood up from her seat and walked over to her son, her earlier anger now gone. She hugged his head close to her bosom like she'd done so many times when he was younger, and slowly rocked him back and forth. "I know, my darling, I know, but this is not the way to go about it. You're slowly killing yourself, and I will die too if something happens to you," she said through her tears. "I'm sorry, Mother, but I don't know what to do anymore," he said as his tears soaked the front of her bodice. Riley Scott was still reeling from the shock of losing his young wife and child through a complicated birth a year earlier, just before Christmas. He'd immediately sunk into a deep depression, and when it seemed like he was finally easing out of it, he'd turned to alcohol. His older brother Ryan had tried severally to speak to Riley, only to be met with hostility. Marie, their mother, had fared no better, but she wasn't about to give up. Had it not been for both his mother and brother, Riley's ranch would have been in ruin, as he hadn't bothered about it since Tammy and their baby passed away. Marie and Riley had just finished eating their breakfast when Ryan walked into the house. He was pleasantly surprised to see his brother and mother seated together on the couch having a conversation. They stopped when he walked in. "Good morning, Mother Riley," he greeted them as he went to seat on an armchair across from them. "Good morning, Ryan," his mother replied, while Riley smiled at him. "Would you like some breakfast?" "No thanks, Mother. I already ate with Natalie and the twins," Ryan replied. He still couldn't get over the fact that Riley was seated so calmly on the couch. One could have hardly got him out of his room earlier, and the few times he did leave, he would go straight to a saloon in Elmo and drink himself to a stupor. "Good to hear," Marie replied. Are the twins excited about Christmas? Of course they are. To them, it's all about the presents, Ryan said, and his mother laughed. Riley managed a tiny smile. It was a tough topic, as this year would mark the first anniversary of Tammy's death. It would also be his second Christmas without her. Riley, do you have any plans for the festivities? Ryan cautiously asked. Not quite, Ryan, but I'm sure Mother will come up with something, he answered calmly, and Ryan was elated. His brother was finally coming out of the darkness that had engulfed him for almost a year. Not to worry. We could as well all celebrate together here at the ranch, Ryan said, and Riley nodded his agreement. Marie listened quietly to her two sons' banter, and it was almost as if everything was back to normal. Her biggest wish this year was for Riley to let go of the past and look to the future. At only 22 years of age, he had all his life ahead of him. He had a right to start over, she felt. Mother? Ryan called a second time. He could see she was lost in thoughts, and he knew exactly what about. It had been a tough year for all of them, she, in particular, having to watch as her last-born son slowly withered away. Huh? Marie said, jolted back to the present. I asked what kind of a present you'd like this year, Ryan said. Oh, I don't know, son. Why don't you surprise me? She replied with a smile. All right, I will, Ryan said. What about you, Riley? What would you like for Christmas? Marie asked her younger son. Riley thought for a while. His brain was telling him to tell them that all he wanted for Christmas was Tammy and his baby back. But he had been rude enough to his mother that morning and had seen the pain he'd caused her. He didn't wish to do that to her again. Oh, a pair of boots would be nice. The ones I have remaining are old and worn out, he answered to the amusement of his mother and brother. Then a pair of boots it will be, she replied. Chapter 3. The next couple of weeks at the hotel were uneventful for Barbara, but her heart was still not settled. It would only be when she left New Orleans. But where would she go? She never managed to save anything, and even if she did, she had no idea where she could go. There were no relatives she knew of, and maybe whenever she chose to go, her bad luck would follow her there as well. A penny for your thoughts, dear, Mr. Bailey said when he found her holding her chin as she stared out of a window on the first floor, deep in thought. I'm wondering whether Santa will grant my wish this Christmas, she sighed. And what wish is that, dear? The older man asked. I wish to leave this place and travel far away, Mr. Bailey, she answered. Where would you wish to go? He asked. He wished she could leave too. This was no place for a sweet young girl like her. It held no prospects, and she would only live a life of misery if she stayed. I don't know yet, but anywhere that is not New Orleans and doesn't hold so many bad memories for me would do, she answered. I hope you go far away, dear. I have no family here either, and I wish I'd left when I had the chance, he answered, and Barbara thought she had a note of regret in his voice. Why, Mr. Bailey? You could leave too if you wanted, she said. No, dear, I'm too old now, and this is the only place I've known all my life. Furthermore, I have a stable job here. Where else would I get employed in my advanced age? He posed. Leave, dear, when you get a chance. That evening in his small room at the hotel, Bailey thought about what Barbara had told him earlier that morning. He'd had the same dreams when he was younger after his fiancée left him at the altar, but he'd never followed up on those plans. Now he was 75 years old and had nothing else other than this job at the hotel. He no longer held any wish to move to another place, but it wasn't the same for Barbara. At 18 years old, she was young enough to start someplace new and to make something out of her life. Suddenly an idea occurred to him, and he knew exactly how he could help her. The loud screams from the second floor at the hotel startled Bailey, and he quickly placed the newspaper he'd been reading on the desk and dashed up the stairs as fast as his old legs could carry him. He signaled frantically for the bellboy to follow him. The young man had heard the screams, but he'd stood glued on the same spot out of fear. What's happening, Mr. Bailey? The young man asked as they hurried up the stairs. I don't know, Harry. That's what we're going to find out, Bailey answered breathlessly. They reached the second floor and rushed down the narrow hallway to where the screams were coming from. Luckily, the door to the room wasn't locked, and when Bailey pushed it open, he couldn't believe his eyes. A male guest, who'd only checked into the hotel a few days earlier, had Barbara pinned on the bed as he frantically tried to yank up the skirts of her dress. Bailey picked up a lantern placed on the bedside table and hit him hard on the head. The man let out a loud yell, and he fell on top of the terrified girl. Barbara pushed him away from her, got off the bed, and dashed out of the room. The two men stood over the man as he groaned in pain and tried to sit up. "What do you think you're doing, you old geezer?" the man managed to say as he sat up, rubbing his throbbing head. Bailey could smell the strong stench of alcohol coming from the man's breath. "That's what you get, you tyrant," Bailey retorted, and the man laughed sarcastically. "What do you care for that hopeless maid? She's just like the rest of them," he spat, and Bailey saw red. He picked up the lantern again and hit the arrogant gent on the head with it, much harder this time. The man's eyes rolled in the back of his head as he sank to the floor. "Mr. Bailey, you've killed him," Harry yelled, his lower lip trembling with fear. "He's just fainted, Harry, but I wouldn't shed a tear if he were dead," Bailey answered, and Harry thought he'd never seen Bailey that furious. "What if he reports you to the manager?" the young man asked. "Oh, let him. He'll have to explain why an old man like me hit him, and I bet he wouldn't want that," Bailey answered. "I guess so," Harry concurred. "Let's go and find Barbara," Bailey said. They walked out of the room and closed the door behind them. They found her under the staircase sobbing her heart out. "Mr. Bailey, I can't work here anymore," she wept as the older man held her in his arms. Harry looked on, but he had no idea how he could help. "I know, dear, and I agree with you," Bailey replied as the young girl wept harder. "How will I survive now? I'm sure going to die, Mr. Bailey," she sobbed. "No, dearest, you'll be fine. I'll help you," he said, and the young lady looked up at him in surprise. "You know where I can find another job?" she asked. "No, dear, but I have a better plan," he answered, throwing her into more confusion. "What is it then?" she asked. "I have some money saved up that I no longer need. I'll give that to you," he answered, and Barbara was shocked. "And what will you do?" she asked. "I'll be fine, don't worry about me, and then I will show you how to travel out west to get married," he said. "To get married, to whom and how?" she asked. "As a mail-order bride, we will have to find you a husband out west," he smiled. "How?" she asked. "I will show you," he answered and winked at her. Chapter 4. Riley seemed to have calmed down after his earlier outburst with his mother during breakfast a few days earlier. He'd even shown interest in joining his two ranch hands, Bob and Doug, as they went about their daily chores. It was just like he'd been doing before the tragedy hit. Marie would watch him go about his day and smile with gratitude. He'd also scaled back on the drinking, only having a drink here and there, which his mother and brother didn't mind that much. It was time he put his life back in order, and Marie knew just how that would happen. But to pull off her plan successfully, she would need Ryan's help. "Mother, your plan sounds quite good to me, but how are we going to do this without Riley finding out?" Ryan asked one afternoon as he sat on the porch with his mother. "You'll be the one to communicate with the girl pretending to be your brother. That's how," Marie explained, and she could see the hesitation on Ryan's face. "Okay, suppose we succeed in bringing the girl here, and he rejects her. What are we going to do with her?" he asked. "He won't, and even if he does, we will keep her here until he changes his mind," she replied, thinking that she hadn't quite thought about that. "I don't know, Mother. I don't think Riley will take to this kindly. What if he hates us forever?" Ryan said. He thought they were rushing the process. Why couldn't his mother give Riley more time to heal? "Don't worry about this too much. You just do the writing, and I will handle your brother when the girl arrives," she replied. "Okay, Mother. I only hope Riley won't hate me forever for this," Ryan sighed. This could explode in their faces, but his mother refused to see that. "Attaboy, let's do this today. You'll write down a short, captivating ad, and you can place it in the Matrimonial Times tomorrow when you go to Elmo," Marie said, her eyes shining with excitement. She could already see Riley with his new wife and with his life back to normal. "So soon, Mother?" he asked. Yes, son, summer is almost over, and soon fall will be upon us. I want this to be Riley's Christmas present, Marie answered, oblivious to Ryan's surprised look. But I thought we would be buying him a pair of boots, he asked, and his mother laughed. A wife sounds better now, don't you think? She replied. I guess so, Mother, Ryan replied. His wife Natalie was a mail-order bride, and they lived quite a happy life. He knew all about the process, but he wished Riley was the one doing the writing. Ryan wasn't even sure Riley would want a mail-order bride. Tammy had been a local girl, one of the few good ones left. But then again, their mother could be right. All that Riley needed was a gentle push in the right direction. Riley noticed that lately, his mother and brother would get together and walk around the ranch whispering amongst themselves. The few times he'd tried asking them whether everything was okay, they'd brush him off with smiles. He was sure they were talking about him. They could be worried that he would fall back into his old habits, but they were in for a big surprise. He'd decided to turn his life around in honor of his late family. He was sure that Tammy wouldn't have approved of the way he was going about life. Marie watched as her youngest son walked into the living room and sat on a couch across from her. He looked healthier, and she could see his handsome features slowly begin to replace the haggard look he'd been spotting earlier. His forehead was sweaty, and she knew he'd come from inspecting the ranch. She placed her knitting next to her on the couch and turned to him. Good afternoon, Mother, he greeted her. Good afternoon, dear. How's everything coming with the ranch? She asked, and she saw his eyes brighten up. Oh, everything is good, Mother. A few of the cattle need branding, though. I'm also happy to announce that we will be welcoming new calves in a few months' time, he reported happily. You see, all that the ranch needed was to have you back, and everything would begin to shine again, she replied. We needed you too. I know, Mother, and I'm sorry that I gave all of you such a scare. It was the only way I could cope, he replied, and his mother smiled. I understand, and I'm happy that you're doing this good now. Tell me, don't you think it's time you thought about having another family? She asked. Of course, Mother. That will happen in due time. Right now, I want to concentrate on the ranch and everything else that I've missed out on, he replied. Well, that's good. But at only 22 years old, you should begin to build your life back. I'm sure that's what Tammy would want for you, she pushed. I hear you, Mother, and I will consider your advice, he said, just to get her to stop. He would remarry, yes, but only when he was ready. Chapter 7%. Barbara heard the slight knock at her door and wondered why the landlord would be showing up at her house that early in the morning. Thanks to Bailey's kindness, she was up to date on the rent, and she had all her other needs met comfortably, even though she no longer had a job. The more reason she wondered what the pesky man could be doing at her door. She threw a shawl over her nightgown and went to open the door. To her surprise, Harry the bellboy was standing there with a shy smile on his face. Good morning, miss, he said. Good morning, Harry. What brings you here this early morning? She asked, amazed that he even knew where she lived. I'm sorry to bother you, miss, but Mr. Bailey sent me to ask you whether you could kindly go see him at the hotel, the young man said, and Barbara's heart almost missed a beat. Why, is he sick? She asked, anxiety evident on her face. Oh, no, miss. It's nothing like that. He says he needs to talk to you is all, Harry answered with a smile. I see. Please tell him I'll be over in an hour's time, she replied. I will, miss, he said, and turned to leave. Harry, Barbara called, and he stopped and looked back. Miss, he said. Thank you, she smiled. It was my pleasure, miss, he said, and with that he walked away. As Barbara closed the door behind her, she wondered what Bailey wanted to see her about. Could he have found her a new job someplace else? She didn't mind as long as it wasn't in that hotel. A month had passed, and he hadn't said anything about the husband he was to find for her out west. Maybe none of them felt she was good enough for them. She wouldn't be that surprised, as that had been her story ever since she could remember. Rejection was all she knew, and she doubted that would ever change. Bailey broke into a wide smile when he saw Barbara step into the lobby. He could tell that she was still fearful of the place, as her eyes darted from one side to the other as she walked in. She had bought a new dress, he could tell, and he was happy that she was making good use of the money he'd given her. He was happy to have given all of it to her, and even happier that she had accepted it wholeheartedly. "Barbara, it's so good to see you," Bailey exclaimed as he left his desk and came around to hug the young girl. He didn't know why she brought him so much happiness, but she did. "It's wonderful, too, to see you again, my dear Mr. Bailey," she too exclaimed as she hugged him back. "Come now, you no longer work here. You don't need to call me Mr. Bailey. Just Bailey will suffice," he smiled at her. "How about I call you Grandpa Bailey?" she asked. "That sounds even better," he answered in glee. "Now let me show you why I sent for you so abruptly." He motioned for her to follow him back to his desk. He pulled open a drawer beneath the desk and removed a copy of a newspaper that Barbara wasn't familiar with. He flicked the pages up to the middle, removed a full one, and then pushed it across the desk to her. "What's this, Grandpa Bailey?" she asked, not quite understanding where the older man was going with this. "My dear, this is a copy of the Matrimonial Times. Have you ever heard of the mail-order bride service?" he asked the astonished girl. She shook her head no. Bailey then explained what the service entailed to an awestruck Barbara. "That's very interesting, Grandpa Bailey. I've never heard of it, though," she said. "Well, here's where it gets interesting. I've already gone through all of these ads, and this one caught my eye," he said as he pushed the page closer to her so she could read the ad herself. "A 22-year-old gentleman rancher in Elmo, Texas, is desirous of a young lady for marriage and companionship. Decevity. She shouldn't be more than 20 years old, of a kind disposition, trustworthy, and ready to settle on a ranch." "Is that all they write?" Barbara asked when she was done reading. "Yes, dear, and that's all you need to know for now. Anything else you'll find out when a correspondence is established," he answered. He turned to the girl, and she was looking down deep in thought. "What is it, dear?" "I don't think I should write him," she said softly. "Why?" Bailey asked. "I don't think he'll want to marry me anyway," she answered. "How will you know if you don't try?" he asked her with a smile. "You really think I should?" she asked again. "I know you shouldn't let this chance pass you by. Any man worth his salt would be overjoyed to marry such a wonderful and kind person such as you," he said. "Okay, I will tonight," she promised. That night in her apartment, Barbara struggled to find the right words to jot down. Bailey had bought her enough stationery, and all she had to do was write an introduction letter and then mail it at the postal exchange the following day. As she chewed on one of her fingernails trying to gather her thoughts, a loud noise sounded from the saloon downstairs, followed by loud, obnoxious laughter. That was all the incentive she needed. Infuriated, Barbara dipped her quill pen in the ink and began writing. She had to do what she could to leave all this misery behind, she thought angrily as the pen flew over the white sheet of paper. When she was finished a short while later, she sat back and read what she'd written carefully and was satisfied. She then folded the letter neatly and placed it in the envelope. Chapter 6. Ryan carefully held the stack of letters in one hand as he held on tightly to the reins with his other hand as he rode his gelding on a slow trot towards Riley's house. He knew that his brother would be out on the ranch with his ranch hands, and their mother would be in the house with the housekeeper. He remembered when he'd told his late father that he had no interest in running the family ranch and how upset the older man had become. Ken Scott couldn't understand why his oldest son would want to go into any other business instead of concentrating on the ranch, which was one of the most productive in Elmo. "Why would you leave all this responsibility to Riley while you're perfectly capable of helping out?" Ken glared at his son. "Father, I've always told you that I want to own a mercantile in town," Ryan answered calmly. He wasn't about to let the old man intimidate him. "It will never be as profitable as this ranch, I tell you," Ken replied. "I know that it will be, Father, and that's what I will do. Riley will be happy to run the ranch, I'm sure," he replied. "In that case, I don't understand why you still live here," his father spat. "Oh, I'm leaving soon. I've identified a large enough farm where I want to build a house. It's not too far from here, Ryan replied with pride. He'd been saving for a few years from the ranch's proceeds, and now he had enough money to buy his farm and to open up his business with the balance. Well, I'll be. I'm sure your mother is in on this. After all, you two have never cared much for the ranch, Ken muttered under his breath. His wife Marie and his oldest son Ryan were cut from the same cloth. Marie considered herself high society, and she couldn't be bothered with the ranch. But she sure enjoyed the perks that came with owning such a profitable ranch, he thought angrily. That had been 6 years back, and their father was now long dead. Ryan's mercantile was one of the best in the town, and he was now married with 2 children. Had his father still been alive, Ryan was sure that he would have been very proud of him, even though he'd gone against the old man's wishes. He steered the animal into his brother's driveway and tied it to a post near the stables. Ryan then dismounted, the pile of letters still clenched in his sweaty hand, and walked towards the front door. He could hear his mother giving orders to the young housekeeper inside the kitchen as he strode into the house. "Mother, how are you?" he called as he walked toward the living room. "I'm fine, dear. I will be with you shortly," she answered back. Ryan walked to the big windows in the living room instead of taking a seat and stared outside. Fall was upon them, and the trees were covered in colorful foliage while the ground was littered beautifully with red, yellow, and orange fall leaves. But his heart was not at peace. They were going behind his brother's back on a very personal matter, and he was worried about the repercussions. The same couldn't be said of their mother, who waltzed into the room with a big smile on her lips as soon as she spotted the letters in his hand. "Is that what I think it is, dear?" she asked, as she motioned for him to come and sit next to her on the couch. "Yes, Mother. I picked them up from the postal exchange this morning," Ryan answered as he sat next to his overly excited mother. "Come now, let's see what's inside," she said, practically snatching the pile from his hand. Marie would read the first few sentences, make a face, mutter something under her breath, and place the letter on her side. She did this for some time as Ryan watched in silence before she finally read one and let out a cheer. "We have a winner, dear," she exclaimed as she waved the letter in her son's face. "Well, read it then," Ryan replied, and his mother was only too happy to oblige. "Dear sir, your ad in the Matrimonial Times caught my eye, and I thought I should write to you right away. Perhaps I'm too hasty in this matter, but I feel that I'm the lady you're looking for. My name is Barbara Morris, and I'm 18 years old. I live alone in New Orleans. Well, not quite alone. My grandpa Bailey checks on me every now and then. He's not really my grandpa, as he picked me up from the streets. He then gave me a job at a local hotel, but I no longer work there due to some unbearable circumstances. I would very much wish to leave this place where I've known nothing but heartbreak. Elmo, Texas, feels like a wonderful place to start my life over. I await your response with an eager heart. Yours sincerely, Barbara Morris." This is the kind of girl we need, son. She sounds desperate to leave her hometown and would accept a marriage proposal in an instant. I like that she sounds naive and quite not wizened to the ways of the world. "I have a good feeling about her," Marie explained, breathless with glee. "What would you have me do now, Mother?" Ryan asked, even though he already knew the answer. "Why, dear, I want you to reply to her letter this evening. We can't afford to lose her to another suitor. Don't you agree?" his mother answered. "All right, I will do as you ask," Ryan sighed. He couldn't say no even if he'd wanted to. "Thanks, I always know I can count on you, dear," Marie answered, the joy on her face evident. Chapter 7. It seemed to Barbara as if she'd been waiting for a lifetime when she finally received a reply from the gentleman in Texas, but it had only been 3 weeks. She had almost lost hope and was wondering whether she should have written to a couple more gentlemen. Perhaps she'd sounded too desperate and he'd lost interest after reading the letter. She would fret. The last time she'd visited Bailey at the hotel, he'd told her to be a little bit more patient. Now, as she held the letter in her hands, she couldn't wait to get to her apartment and read it. As Barbara opened the weather-beaten door to her humble abode, her heart pounded so loudly in her chest that she could almost hear it. She slowly walked inside and sat on her bed. As she looked at the envelope clenched tightly in her hand, she knew whatever was inside would dictate whether her life was about to change for the best or she would remain in this misery. She had almost depleted all of Bailey's savings, and she wasn't sure the old man had any more money to give. She lifted the letter to her lips, brushed her lips lightly against it, and then ripped the envelope open. Dear Barbara, I received your letter with a lot of excitement and with a grateful heart. Why, it stood out to me the moment I read the first sentence. Such poise and eloquence. I'm Riley Scott, and I own a ranch here in Elmo, Texas, where I live with my dear mother, Marie. My elder brother, Ryan, lives a mile down the road from us with his family. I would very much like to make your acquaintance and get to know you better. I look forward to your reply. Yours sincerely, Riley Scott. Barbara only realized that her hands were shaking when she finished reading the last word. She hadn't expected the gentleman Riley to be so generous with his words. She read it a second time, hoping that this wasn't some kind of a dream that she would eventually wake up from. Bailey had been right. This truly was the man she was looking for. And now it seemed as if he felt the same way. Bailey had to know about this, she thought happily as she rose from her bed, tucked the letter in her dress pocket, and hurried towards the door. Barbara, it's so nice to see you, Bailey said as soon as he saw her walk inside. It's nice to see you too, Grandpa Bailey, and you won't believe what has happened, she exclaimed, her eyes glistening with excitement. She walked over to the older man and kissed him on the cheek. Tell me already, dear one. My heart will give out from all this guessing, he answered, noting how innocent and young she looked while she was happy and at ease. I received a reply from him. Here, I will read it out to you, she said as she removed the envelope from her dress pocket and began to read. What did I tell you? I had a good feeling about this one, Bailey said as soon as Barbara finished reading. And you were right, Barbara said happily. When do you plan on replying to him? I've no doubt in my mind that he's going to propose marriage to you, dear, he said. I will accept Grandpa Bailey. I can't wait to move away from this place. She replied, but then stopped talking when she saw the look on Bailey's face. Of course, I'm going to miss you a lot. You're the only good thing I have here. I know, dear, and I'm going to miss you a lot too, but you have to follow your destiny. You'll be okay, and so will I, Bailey answered as the young girl walked into his open arms, and they held on to each other until a guest walked into the lobby, and they broke apart. She wrote her reply that same night and posted it the following morning. It wouldn't be until 3 weeks before she would receive a reply from him. Barbara wished the days would fly fast. She felt as if she already knew this man and that he knew her as well. This was the first time she felt as if someone else other than Bailey truly cared for her. She would think of him when she lay on her bed, wondering what he looked like. It became a habit for her to pass by the postal exchange every morning and evening. The young man manning the counter would smile politely at the beautiful girl as he informed her that there still was nothing for her. 3 weeks later, a letter came for her. She was visibly shaking as she opened it, but soon her nerves calmed down. Riley had proposed marriage, and he wanted her to travel to Texas soon if she accepted his proposal. He hoped she'd be there for Christmas. There was nothing she wanted more. Tears of joy ran down her face as she thought of how much she'd suffered. But now, there finally was a ray of hope. She couldn't wait to give Bailey the wonderful news, but darkness was quickly setting in, and she didn't want to meet with the drunks that usually flocked the saloon downstairs during that hour. Bailey was as overjoyed as Barbara was when she gave him the good news the following morning. All he wanted was for this girl that he cared for so deeply to find happiness before he left this earth. He was getting on with the years, and he knew he didn't have a lot of time left. Did you accept the proposal yet? He asked. Not yet, Grandpa. I wanted to tell you first. I thought that would bring me good luck, she replied, and Bailey was touched that she placed that much trust in him. And so it shall be, dear one. It seems that you might just get your Christmas present after all, he answered, and they both laughed. Chapter 8. Ryan read Barbara's letter as his mother sat patiently next to him, listening to every word. It was as she had thought. A girl like Barbara, who had experienced so much grief growing up, wouldn't turn down such a marriage proposal. She was young, very likable, and Marie knew she would be able to shape her into the woman she needed for her son Riley. You should make haste and invite her. Also, send her enough money for her travels. It can't be easy for her to raise the money needed for a train ticket, Marie instructed her oldest son. All right, mother, Ryan answered, happy that this was the last time he would be writing to this girl, pretending to be his younger brother Riley. When their mother had suggested that they should get Riley a wife so he could try and move on with his life, Ryan had been fully on board until he realized that his mother didn't want Riley to marry another local girl. He was worried that Riley would feel betrayed that they'd written an ad on his behalf, chosen the girl for him, and then brought her over to Texas, and all that without his knowledge. I need her to be here by Christmas, she said, and then picked up her knitting nonchalantly. Mother, have you thought about the repercussions of what we're doing? I don't think I'm ready for Riley's wrath, Ryan said. Leave that to me. He's my child, and I will handle him, she answered. Riley watched from his hideout by the stables as Ryan left the house, seemingly deep in thought. For a while now, he'd suspected that his brother and mother were doing something behind his back, but he couldn't tell what. He had tried asking his mother whether the two were keeping a secret from him, but she'd vehemently denied anything was going on. Riley knew his family still walked on eggshells around him, thinking that any little thing would trigger him into going back to his earlier vices. But they were wrong. As much as the tragedy had shattered him, he was going to keep the word he'd given to his late father on his deathbed. He remembered the events of that day vividly. Son, I'm not going to survive this, his father had whimpered from his bed as Riley held on tightly to his weathered hand. Don't say that, Father. You're going to pull through, I know it, Riley said. Not this time, Riley, Ken Scott said as he labored for breath. He'd had a couple of heart attacks in recent years, but he'd always pulled through. This time, though, he could feel that he was dying. We will look for another doctor, Riley cried desperately. It won't do me any good, son. The problem is my heart and not the doctor, he'd answered. I want you to look after and guard this ranch with all your might. You'll do this alone as your mother and brother don't care for it as much as we do. Do you promise? Yes, Father. I will always make sure that the ranch remains as it has been. One of the best in Texas, Riley promised, and his father squeezed his hand feebly. A day later, the old man died, and Riley had thrown himself into taking care of the ranch until the tragedy hit. He'd gone off the rails, but now he was back to keep the promise he'd given to his father. Mother, you can deny all you want, but I saw Ryan leaving the house. He looked withdrawn too. What's happening? Riley asked. They were seated on the couch after dinner. Nothing is going on, Riley. Your brother and I have a couple of things to talk about, is all, Marie answered, avoiding her son's stare. Why is it that he only comes around when I'm out of the house? He asked. Because that's the only time he's free. Remember, he has to work at his mercantile as well, Marie replied, but she could see that Riley wasn't convinced. You're lying to me, Mother, and I can tell, he said. Well, I have never. Prosody, why would you accuse me of that? She said, pretending to be hurt by his accusation, but Riley wasn't buying it. You realize I'm bound to find out sooner or later? He posed. And when you do, you'll see it wasn't anything bad, she replied. What's that supposed to mean? Her son asked. Tell me, have you given any thought to what Ryan and I told you? She answered his question with one of her own, confusing him even further. What about? Riley asked. Remarrying, it's been long enough, Marie said. I think I told you that I'm not in a hurry to do that, Mother. Tammy has only been gone almost a year now, and my heart still grieves, he answered. She's not coming back, dear. It's time you moved on with your life, don't you think? I moved on pretty fast after your father's death, she said. Maybe you never loved him that much then, Riley muttered under his breath. I beg your pardon, Marie said. Nothing, Mother. I just said the situations are very different. You had time to build a family with Father, but I never had that chance with Tammy, he said instead. Nonetheless, you can't dwell on that forever, she answered. Perhaps so, mother, but I'm not in a hurry. How can I even love another person when my heart still yearns for Tammy? He asked, and the anguish in his voice broke her heart. Maybe she was pushing him too hard, she wondered. It was now too late for any regrets. The deed was done, and Barbara would arrive in Texas soon. It was only now that Marie began to realize why Ryan had been so uncomfortable with the idea. Chapter 9. Barbara couldn't believe it when she opened the letter and saw the money stacked carefully inside. She had never held so much money in her hands, and all she could think about were all the things she could buy with it. Having never traveled out of New Orleans, she had no idea how much a train ticket cost. Not this much, she mused. That was the second thing she would do the following day, after passing by the hotel first to show the money to Bailey. It was all coming together better than she could have ever imagined. That night couldn't sleep a wink as she thought about how life would be in Texas. What was a ranch like? She'd only lived in cities before, and she began to worry that she would fight to fit into the life she was to find in Elmo. Bailey seemed to know everything, and she would ask him about it when she went to see him. Thinking of Bailey, she truly was going to miss him. If only there was a way she could have taken him with her, she sighed, but she knew that even if there had been a way, he would never agree to go. He was never leaving New Orleans. He'd made that clear to her several times. "It's true you're really leaving, dearest," Bailey said when Barbara showed him the letter with the money Riley had enclosed for her travels. "Yes, Grandpa, it's really true," she answered as tears pooled in her eyes. "Don't cry, dear one. I'm happy that you're leaving this life behind you." He smiled at her. "Will you come and visit me?" she asked through her tears. "Yes, I will. I would very much like to meet your new family," Bailey answered, only to appease her. He knew that there was no way that was going to happen. He might even be dead before she settled down in Texas. "Now run along and buy that train ticket." "All right, Grandpa. I want to buy a new dress, a valise, and a pair of new shoes as well," she gushed, the earlier moment of sadness now past. "You buy whatever you need, my girl. You have the money now, don't you?" Bailey said, smiling. "I guess I do," she exclaimed and hurriedly walked out of the hotel. Barbara bought her ticket and then walked across the street to buy a dress, shoes, and a suitcase. The dress came with a matching hat and a pair of white silk gloves. The store's owner, Mrs. Harmon, watched the young lady as she picked up some of the most expensive items, and she wondered where she would get the money to pay for them. She'd known Barbara for a long time and knew that the girl was dirt poor. Had it not been for good old Bailey, who took care of her, she would probably be dead by now. "Mrs. Harmon, wrap all this up for me," Barbara said, and the woman shot her a disbelieving look. "All of it, you say?" she asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Yes, ma'am, every bit of it." Barbara smiled at the woman. Barbara paid for the items, and when she turned to leave the store, she thought she heard the spiteful woman smirk, but she didn't care. Soon they'd realize she was no longer in New Orleans, and the good thing was that they would never know where she went. In the 2 days before her departure, Barbara let the landlord know that she would be leaving, and the man stared at her, mouth agape, not quite sure he'd heard her right. "Where are you going?" he finally spoke. "Far from here," she replied. None of these people deserved to know where she was going. They had all treated her with nothing but disdain, and it was now coming to an end. "Well, safe travels. Winter is upon us, you know," he said. "I know, and thanks," Barbara said as she turned and walked out of the man's filthy office. On the eve of her departure, she spent that morning packing up her single valise. She didn't have much to take with her, and she was okay with that. She would be starting a new life, and there was nothing in her small apartment that would help her to do that. As she mulled around, a knock sounded at the door. What did the pesky landlord need this time? She'd already let him know that she was leaving town. To her delight, it was her old friend Harry the bellboy, but the expression on his face made her blood freeze in her veins. "Harry, what's wrong?" she cautiously asked. The young man could hardly look her in the eyes. "I'm sorry, miss, but I don't have good news," he said. "Harry, what's happened?" she asked again. "It's Bailey, miss. He has left us," he said, and he realized that she didn't quite comprehend what he was trying to say. "Where has he gone?" she asked. He's dead, miss," Harry answered. Barbara felt her knees go weak, and had Harry not grabbed her in time, she would have crumbled to the ground. How could Bailey do this to her? She was planning to go see him that evening to bid him farewell. Why couldn't he wait for her? Everything around her was spinning wildly, but in the midst of it, she could hear his voice as he explained that it had been a sudden heart attack, and there was nothing that could have been done to save him. Long after Harry had left, Barbara curled up in her bed and sobbed like she hadn't in a long time. She now truly had nothing left here in New Orleans. Chapter 10. When Barbara woke up the following morning, her eyes were red and puffy from crying. She would have to travel like that as there was no way she could postpone the journey even if she'd wanted to. She dragged herself to her washstand and did her best to freshen up. Bailey's face kept flashing before her, and she would blink hard as fresh tears threatened to fall again. She was angry at him for leaving her so suddenly. She only had an hour to get to the train station, which wasn't far from where her apartment was. But on this morning, she felt weak, and the excitement she'd had about the journey had somewhat waned. Half an hour later, she was set to go, and as she stood in the middle of what had been her living room for years, she knew she would never miss or even think about it ever again. With her valise in hand, she unlocked the door and stepped outside. To her surprise, it had begun snowing the night before, and she felt as if this was Bailey's way of letting her know that she would be okay. When she arrived at the station, most of the travelers had started getting on the train, and she followed suit. It was too cold anyway to stand outside for long. She took her place by the window and then placed her valise under the seat. Barbara watched as more people walked into the train, some chatting animatedly amongst themselves. If only they knew the pain she carried in her heart. A few minutes later, the final bell rang, and it was time to depart. As the train left the station, Barbara watched as the buildings became smaller and smaller until they became distinct. The first leg of the journey was uneventful, and most of the travelers seemed engrossed in their own thoughts. The snow was steadily piling up, but the conductor had assured them that they would be arriving in Texas safely. "I just want to be home for Christmas with my family," a middle-aged lady seated across the aisle from Barbara said. "Oh, that's great. I'm going to Elmo to meet my fiancé," Barbara answered. She wasn't in the mood to hold a conversation, but she also didn't want to appear rude. "Oh, he works there?" the lady asked. "No, he lives there. I'm meeting him for the first time," she replied, and the lady's eyes grew wide. "So you're one of those." Her voice trailed away. "Mail-order brides," Barbara finished for her with a smile. "I will never understand how that arrangement works. How can you marry a person you haven't met in person?" she asked as if it was the most disgusting thing she'd ever heard of. "Well, it's quite a common practice out west, ma'am," Barbara answered, and turned her head to the other side. The lady had looked too elegant to be that ignorant. The rest of the journey was spent mostly in silence, and on the fourth day, the conductor announced that they were soon approaching Elmo, Texas. Barbara reached into her dress pocket and brought out Riley's last letter. In it, he'd explained that he would be dressed in a pair of jeans, a red checked shirt, and a beige jacket. He would then tie a white ribbon on one of the jacket's sleeves so she could easily recognize him. The train came to a complete stop at the station, and the travelers started disembarking onto the snowy ground. Barbara adjusted her hat and then picked up her valise. She could now see why Riley had described exactly what he would be wearing. Almost all of the men she could see had on a pair of jeans, a checked shirt, and a jacket on top. Most of them also sported wide-brimmed hats, and she could see them touch the brims to ladies or remove the hat altogether. She made it safely to the ground and walked towards the platform as she looked around, trying to spot him. "Miss Morris?" A voice called as she was about to place her valise on the platform's floor. "Yes?" %, she answered and turned to see who it was. The gentleman standing before her was tall and ruggedly handsome, and the top of his hat was covered with white freckles of snow. He didn't quite look 22 years old, and she thought perhaps it was because he hadn't shaved in days. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Ryan Scott," he introduced himself, and Barbara thought she heard him wrong. "Ryan or Riley?" she asked, looking bewildered. "Oh, my apologies for the confusion, miss. I'm Riley's older brother, Ryan. Due to some pressing matters, he was unable to come pick you up himself. He has sent me in his place," he answered as he tipped the brim of his hat to her. "I see," Barbara replied, her face brightening up. Riley had mentioned that he had an older brother who was married, and this must be him. "We should get going now. Mother is eagerly waiting for you at home. Riley will join us later on," he said as he reached for her valise. "This is yours, I presume?" "Yes, it is," she answered. She was feeling a bit sad that she was going to meet Riley's mother without him. What had been so important that he couldn't come and meet her himself? "This way, miss. My cart is across the street. Have you ever ridden one?" he asked, hoping to put her at ease. She looked disappointed, and who wouldn't be? She had expected to be picked up by her fiancé, but instead, his brother showed up, and it was bound to get worse when she found out the whole truth. "Yes, sir, I did when I was younger," she answered. "Good. It's not too far out to the ranch, I promise," he said, and she nodded her understanding. He placed her case on the back bench and then helped her at the front with him. After making sure she was okay, he hopped up next to her, pulled on the reins, and the cart began moving forward. In a few minutes, they'd arrive at the ranch where the truth would finally be unveiled. That was something Ryan wasn't looking forward to. Chapter 11. A few minutes later, they pulled into a driveway, and Barbara instantly knew that they'd arrived at their destination. The house was big and well-maintained, she noticed. There was no doubt that this was an affluent family, and a sudden wave of fear engulfed her. How was she going to fit in with them? All she'd ever known was poverty. Luckily, she hadn't kept her tough upbringing from Riley in their correspondence. That must count for something, she comforted herself. "Well, miss, here we are," he said, glancing at her. She looked scared and unsure of herself. "I'll come around and help you down." He could feel her gloved hand trembling with what he assumed was fear as he helped her to the ground, and he wished there was something he could have told her to put her mind at ease. "Let's go inside," Ryan said, her valise in his hand. She quietly followed behind him as he led her down a long hallway. The interior of the house was just as immaculate as she had earlier imagined. "Mother, this here is Miss Barbara Morris," Ryan said as they entered a tastefully furnished room, which Barbara could tell was the living room. She timidly followed him inside as the elegant older woman, seated on a couch, slowly lifted her eyes from her knitting to appraise Barbara. "Miss Morris, it's so nice to finally meet you. Please come and have a seat," the older woman said as she patted the empty space beside her. Barbara slowly walked towards her and sat down as instructed. "I'm Marie Scott, Ryan and Riley's mother." "It's very nice to meet you as well, ma'am," she replied. Barbara could feel the other woman's eyes scrutinizing her, and she squirmed uncomfortably in her seat. "I know you must be tired from the journey. Would you like to freshen up and then have something to eat, perhaps?" the older woman asked. "I would like that very much, ma'am," Barbara answered, and she was being sincere. She hadn't slept much on the train, and the food had been bland and tasteless, so she'd barely eaten anything. She could do with a comfortable place to lie down as well as a well-cooked home meal. "Well then, fret no more, dear," Marie said as she picked up a small bell by her side and shook it lightly. In an instant, a middle-aged woman appeared in the doorway and took a few steps into the room. "You called, ma'am?" she asked. "Yes, Agatha. Kindly show Miss Morris here to the room. I had you tidy up and make sure she settles in comfortably," Marie said, and Agatha nodded her understanding. "Very well, ma'am. Miss Morris, if you will follow me," Agatha said as she picked up Barbara's case and walked out of the room with Barbara following closely behind her. As soon as the ladies were out of sight, Marie turned to Ryan, who'd been seated quietly in an armchair closely watching what was unfolding before him. "She does seem like a sweet young woman, somewhat naive but very appealing to the eye," Marie said. "Yes, mother. Barbara seems like a very nice person. I feel sorry that she was brought here on a ruse, Ryan answered, and his mother shot him a disapproving look. You're speaking as if we've done something wrong, his mother said. Haven't we, Mother? He asked, but Marie didn't answer. I have to leave now. I hope everything goes as planned. Otherwise, there will be hell to pay. I will leave now if you don't need anything else, Agatha said to Barbara. Thank you, Agatha. I'm sure I'll be fine, Barbara answered. All right, miss, the housekeeper said, and then she turned and walked out of the room, closing the door behind her. Left alone in the room, Barbara looked around, very happy with what she was seeing. The room was sparsely but tastefully furnished. The curtains adorning the big windows were exquisite, and the bed linen was clean and smelled fresh. The walls shone as if they'd been recently painted, giving the whole room a vibrant and welcoming look. As she unpacked her suitcase, she couldn't help but notice how cheap and dated her clothes looked compared to all the things she'd observed in this house. As she went to sit on the bed, a nagging feeling she'd had since she talked with Mrs. Scott wouldn't leave her mind. Why hadn't she mentioned Riley in their conversation? Deciding to throw the uncomfortable feeling to the back of her mind, Barbara freshened up the best she could. She then lay down on the bed, hoping to rest a bit before she went downstairs to join Mrs. Scott, and hopefully Riley would be back by then. It was almost dark when Barbara startled awake, and in a panic, she quickly brushed her hair and threw a shawl over her dress. What was Mrs. Scott going to think about her behavior? She hurried down the stairs, and as she walked to the living room, she could hear Marie talking to someone she assumed to be Ryan. Miss Morris, I hope you've rested well. You're just in time for dinner, Marie called out cheerfully as Barbara walked into the room. Seated next to Marie on an armchair was a young man who was a spitting younger image of Ryan. He was dressed in a pair of jeans, a checked shirt, and a heavy jacket on top, just like every other man in Elmo, Barbara mused. He didn't look up as she went to the seat next to Marie. Mother, you didn't tell me we will be entertaining a guest for dinner tonight. I could have changed from my dreary attire to something decent, he growled, and Barbara could tell that he wasn't happy that there was a visitor in their house. Riley, please meet Miss Barbara Morris. She's here from New Orleans, Marie said, ignoring her son's aloofness. Okay, so who is she and how long is she visiting for? He asked, still not showing any interest. Barbara felt her world begin to spin wildly around her, and she felt as if she was going to become sick. Riley had no idea who she was. How could this be possible when they'd been in correspondence for weeks? She turned to Marie for a sign, any sign, but the older woman wouldn't meet her gaze. Chapter 12. Chapter 12. Son, there's something I want to talk to you about, Marie said. She still wouldn't look at Barbara, who by now was positive that something was amiss. Of course, Mother. What is it? Riley asked. He turned to look at her, his curiosity now roused. Marie cleared her throat, but before she could say a word, Agatha walked in and announced that dinner was ready. The older lady let out a sigh of relief. She didn't know how she was going to tell both Barbara and Riley the truth. She could see that Barbara had already noticed that all was not well. You can go ahead and set the table, Agatha, she said. Of course, ma'am, Agatha replied and left the room. Dinner was a quiet affair, with everyone at the table avoiding eye contact. Barbara, who had earlier been famished, picked at her food before she stopped eating altogether. She could feel Marie stealing glances at her when the older woman thought she wasn't looking. Riley couldn't be bothered, and he acted as if Barbara wasn't even present at the table. What did you want to talk to me about, Mother? Riley asked after they'd left the dining table. Does she need to be here as well? Yes, son. Barbara is a big part of what I'm going to tell you, Marie replied. Out with it, Mother. I'm beginning to get worried, Riley said. His mother was acting very strangely that evening. Miss Morris is your guest, son, Marie quickly blurted out, and you could hear a pin drop. What are you talking about, Mother? I don't know this lady, he retorted. Calm down, son. I'm going to explain everything to you shortly, his mother said. Barbara sat quietly as she watched her future come crumbling down. Riley truly had no idea who she was, and she was sure he didn't even know that she was coming to Texas. If he didn't know who she was, then who had she been in communication with? She badly wanted to ask that question, but her tongue was so dry she could hardly utter a single word. Well, Mother, I'm waiting. Riley glared at his mother. Remember that talk Ryan and I had with you? She asked, looking at her son. What talk? About my earlier vices? What has that got to do with her? He asked, turning his face briefly towards Barbara. No, son. The other talk about you going on with your life, Marie said. Riley shot her a fierce look as it finally dawned on him what his mother was trying to say. Don't tell me she's a... he said as his voice trailed off, the word he was looking for refusing to leave his tongue. Yes, son, she is a mail-order bride. We thought it would be a good idea if we... Marie started to say, but a furious Riley cut her short. You thought? You and whom? Why was I never consulted? Riley asked, his voice full of venom. Calm down, son. Your brother and I thought it would be a good idea to do this for you, Marie told an irate Riley. Is that why you two have been holding secretive meetings behind my back? Mother, I told you that I would remarry when I was good and ready, he barked. Mrs. Scott, I would like to go to my room now if I may be excused, Barbara said, and mother and son turned to look at her as if they'd forgotten she was even in the room. Miss Morris, I'm so sorry about this, but my older son and I thought we were doing the right thing, Marie told a shaken Barbara, who seemed to be on the verge of tears. I understand, ma'am, but I still want to be excused, Barbara said, her bottom lip beginning to quiver. Okay, Miss Morris, you're excused, the older woman said. She watched as Barbara slowly walked out of the room, wondering whether this had been such a great idea. Mother, how could you do this to that poor girl? Are you now going to send her back to New Orleans or what? Riley asked. Please think about it. Prosody. You can tell she's a lovely girl, and I feel she would make the perfect wife for you, Marie tried to convince her son. I'm sure she's lovely and all, but she isn't for me. Send her back to wherever she came from, Riley shot back. He then stood and walked out of the room in a huff without even bidding his mother good night. After her son left the room, Marie thought about what had just happened. Maybe Ryan had been right to worry about this arrangement to begin with. She'd pictured a completely different outcome of this when she was making all the arrangements to bring Barbara over. But now, nothing had gone the way she expected, and she had no idea how she could rectify the situation. Chapter 13. Barbara broke down as soon as she closed the bedroom door. It was dark, but she didn't care as she made her way to the bed and sat down. She wept bitterly, wondering why bad luck always followed her wherever she went. This was the chance she'd hoped would make her life better, but now she felt as if she was worse off than before. She wished she'd never left New Orleans. Riley's reaction to her being here was nothing like she'd expected, but it made sense as he'd also been lied to. But why would a woman like Marie and her older son try to trick Riley into marriage? From what she'd seen earlier, he was a handsome young man and fully capable of finding his own partner. As she calmed down, Barbara pondered her next step. She still had some money left over, and it was just enough to buy a train ticket back home. The thought of going back to New Orleans made her shudder with fear, but it was the only home she'd ever known. Her mind went to Bailey, and she could imagine how disappointed he would have been about how the situation had turned out. Santa wasn't going to grant her the wish she'd requested for this Christmas, she thought, as her eyes filled up again with tears. Feeling drained from all the crying, she got off the bed, walked to where the lantern was hanging on the wall, and lit it. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed. Sleep took a long time to come, but finally it did. In his bedroom, all Riley wanted was a shot of whiskey to calm his frayed nerves, but he'd made a promise to himself to stay on the wagon. It irked him so much that his brother and mother would go behind his back to bring him a bride he knew nothing about. His mind strayed to the young lady. She looked out of place, and as confused by the situation just as he was. She probably had been lied to as well. She had sat quietly as he and his mother argued back and forth, and her eyes were clouded with pain when he'd glanced at her. It wasn't any of his business. Ryan and his mother had brought her here, and they were the ones to take her back to where she'd come from. He changed into his nightshirt, slipped into bed, and closed his eyes, willing for sleep to come, but to no avail. He tossed and turned in bed as his thoughts went back to the young lady. Her eyes were a deep shade of blue, which was a perfect contrast to her pale skin. Had the circumstances been different, maybe he would have warmed up to her, he thought, but then caught himself. Why was he thinking about her this way? For the longest time, the only woman who'd been in his mind was Tammy, and he wasn't about to let that change. Soon, his eyelids became heavy, and after a short while, he drifted off to sleep. Barbara was startled by the soft knocking on her door. She sat up in bed, wondering who it could be that early in the morning. She dragged herself out of bed, threw a shawl over her nightgown, and answered for the person to come in. Agatha walked in with a pitcher in her hand. "Good morning, Miss Morris. The madam has sent me to check whether you're awake and to ask you to please join her downstairs for breakfast," Agatha said. "Good morning, Agatha. Thank you for checking on me, but I'd rather not come down. Could you tell that to the madam?" Barbara answered. Without another word, Agatha walked to the washstand, and Barbara could hear her pouring the contents of the pitcher into the wash basin. A second later, Agatha came back and resumed her position at the foot of Barbara's bed. "I'm afraid, Miss Morris, that the madam asked me to make sure you come down with me, or she would come to fetch you herself," Agatha replied nervously. "I will wait outside for you to freshen up." "Okay, I will try not to be too long," Barbara answered after she realized that the housekeeper wasn't budging. She did understand the predicament Agatha was in. She had been ordered to bring her downstairs, and she would suffer the consequences if she failed to do so. Agatha sighed with relief as she walked out of the room, and Barbara went to the washstand. The water was piping hot, and the vapor had formed a cloud of mist on the small mirror hanging on the wall. It was perfect for such a cold morning. She reached for the washcloth and slowly started cleaning up as her mind raced. What did Marie want to talk to her about? Possibly the arrangements for her return to New Orleans. Marie watched Barbara as she walked into the room with Agatha following closely behind her. She looked very beautiful with her freshly washed face, and the dress she wore, though a bit dated, fitted her small frame perfectly. Still, she could read the sadness on the young girl's face. Why couldn't her son see the potential Barbara held for his future? "Good morning, Miss Morris. Please join me at the dining table," Marie said. "Agatha, you can serve our breakfast now." "Yes, ma'am," she replied and hurried out of the room. "Barbara, may I call you that? I'm sorry about how everything turned out yesterday. I realize now that I went about this the wrong way, and I would like for you to stay as I try to find a way to fix the situation," Marie said. "Mrs. Scott, how can I stay while the man I thought was my fiancé can't stand the sight of me?" Barbara said as tears pooled in her eyes. There, dear, pull yourself together. Don't let the servants see your vulnerability," Marie said, patting Barbara's hand comfortingly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't think I can stay. I will go back home on the next available train," she answered, and swallowed back tears. "Give me a few days and I will find a solution, I promise," Marie said. She wasn't about to let Barbara leave the house. Riley will have to hear her out. Chapter 14. Riley heard his mother's voice in the living room as he was coming down for breakfast and instantly changed course. He was still upset about the previous night's happenings, and he wasn't ready to face his mother just yet. He was furious with Ryan as well, and Riley felt that it was a good thing that his brother hadn't shown his face at the ranch yet. Their father had been right. Ryan was a mother's boy, and he always did his mother's bidding. How did they expect him to welcome a total stranger into his life with open arms? He stepped outside and realized that there wouldn't be much to do that day as the snow had grown an inch higher. Riley walked to the stables and saddled his horse Romeo, wanting to ride into town to let out some steam. Romeo neighed happily as Riley stroked his thick mane before saddling him. A few minutes later, they were out of the driveway as they headed to Elmo. There was no need to hurry, and Riley rode the gelding at a slow trot as he took in the crisp, fresh morning air. The snow covering the ground only brought him sad memories of how he'd spent his last Christmas alone and grieving. He arrived in town a few minutes later and tied Romeo to a post, and then walked towards the saloon. As he was about to go inside, he saw Ryan in the distance walking towards his mercantile. There was no better time to confront him, Riley thought, as a silent rage began to build up inside him. He turned away from the saloon and began walking towards where his brother was. "Howdy, Riley. What brings you into town this snowy morning?" Ryan greeted his brother as if nothing was amiss. "I was uncomfortable in my own home, Ryan. Can you imagine why?" Riley answered, his tone laced with sarcasm. "I don't think this is the time or the place to talk about this," Ryan said, hoping to calm his brother down. What had their mother gotten him into? And why would that be? "I was conveniently absent when you and Mother hatched a plot to bring me a mail-order bride," Riley spat, and Ryan took a step toward his brother. "Please, Riley, my workers will be here shortly." "I don't want them to see us fighting," Ryan pleaded, but Riley was too worked up. "I don't care whether they do or not. I want to find out why you two thought that this was a brilliant idea without involving me," he answered. "We thought it was a great idea then." "I'm sorry, but you know how convincing Mother can be," Ryan replied. "What are you going to do with the poor girl now?" Riley asked. "I don't know, Riley. I'm sure Mother will think of something," Ryan answered. "Why don't I stop by the ranch in the evening and we can talk calmly about this?" "I don't see what there is to talk about. My mind is made up. I will remarry when I'm ready and not a minute sooner," Riley said, and Ryan nodded his understanding. He would try and talk to his brother when he calmed down. Marie heard her son walk into the house, and she quickly placed her knitting on the couch and hurried to the hallway. Riley removed his hat and shook off the small specks of snow from it before putting it back on. He was about to head on upstairs when his mother called him. "Riley, could I have a word?" Marie said. "It won't take long, son." "Okay, Mother," he replied, and Marie could see that he really wasn't interested, but he had no choice. They walked back to the living room and sat down side by side on the couch. "Riley, I know I shouldn't have gone behind your back on such a huge personal decision. As your mother, I thought I knew exactly what you needed." "I admit now that I didn't think this plan through," Marie explained. Riley mulled over her words for a second and then turned to her. "Mother, I understand what you were trying to do, and I appreciate it. I feel that you don't trust me to make the right decisions, and that upsets me very much. I told you I would put my life in order all in good time. Haven't I proven it?" he asked, and his mother shook her head in the affirmative. "Then you should have trusted me with this one as well. Now that Barbara is already here, what do you think we should do?" "She feels as betrayed just as much as you do, as she had no idea that you weren't the person she was corresponding with," Marie said. "Maybe it's time she went back home," Riley said. "She has nothing to go back to, son. She has been through hardships all her life, and her coming here was her final shot at a better life," his mother answered. "What would you have me do then, Mother?" Riley asked, not quite understanding what she wanted from him. "Be kind to her and make her feel at home. If in a week you still haven't changed your mind, then I will buy her a train ticket back to New Orleans," she answered. "You're asking too much from me, Mother, but I will do it." "Do you think she will warm up to me after how rudely I've been treating her?" he asked. "She's a good lady and with a beautiful heart to boot," Marie smiled. "You've already placed all that hope in her?" he asked. "Yes, son, I have," Marie replied without batting an eyelid. Chapter 15. Barbara nervously stood in front of the small mirror in her bedroom as she brushed her hair, wondering whether to leave it flowing over her shoulders or to wear it in a bun. Only the night before, after dinner, Marie had informed her that Riley wished to show her around the ranch if she was interested. She didn't know what had caused this turnaround in him, but she couldn't refuse such an offer from him. It would be rude. She finally decided to wear her hair in a bun and then chose one of her newer dresses. It hadn't snowed that much the night before, and the weather was perfect. This was the third day since she'd arrived in Texas, and she'd only stayed after Marie persuaded her to. Riley had been acting completely indifferent towards her, and she worried that he was only showing her around to please his mother. Whatever the reason was, she had already agreed to accompany him, and it was too late now to pull out. Riley tapped his foot impatiently on the floor as he waited for Barbara to come down. Perhaps he'd been too hasty in accepting his mother's proposal. The fact that he was taking this lady on a tour around the ranch didn't mean that he was automatically agreeing to marry her. "Calm down, Riley. I'm sure she's on her way down," Marie, who was seated on the couch with her knitting on her lap, said. She couldn't read her son's demeanor, but the fact that he'd agreed to this was enough for her. "Shouldn't you send Agatha to go and check on her?" Riley said, a hint of irritation evident in his voice. "You spoke too soon. Here she comes," his mother announced, smiling from ear to ear. Riley turned to look towards the staircase, and his jaw dropped open. Barbara looked breathtaking. Her hair was pulled back from her face, and for the first time he noticed how perfectly oval-shaped it was. Her blue eyes were framed by the thickest of eyelashes, and she seemed like a totally different person. She wore a simple white floral dress and had thrown a thick shawl over her shoulders. As she slowly made her way into the room, she looked angelic, and a strange feeling he hadn't had in a long time ran through his entire body. "Good morning, Miss Morris," he greeted her, and for the first time she smiled at him, and his heart almost skipped a beat. She had the most adorable dimples on each cheek. A thin streak of sweat ran down the small of his back, and he was worried he would make a fool of himself in front of the two ladies. "Good morning, Mr. Scott," she answered, and then averted her gaze shyly. "Barbara, you look very nice," Marie gushed. She had seen her son's reaction, and that was exactly what she had hoped for. "Well, we should get going before this winter weather decides to change on us," he managed to say. "All right, children, don't be late for lunch," Marie said as she winked knowingly at her son. She then turned back to her knitting as the pair walked out of the house. "This is Romeo," Riley said as he saddled the animal. "Oh," Barbara replied. She'd thought they would walk around the ranch and then come back home. "You looked scared. You've never been on horseback before?" he asked. She looked terrified of Romeo, and Riley found it quite amusing. "No, I haven't," she answered. "Well, there is always a first time for everything, now isn't there?" he replied, looking at her. "Yes, I guess," she replied. "Don't worry, it's not as scary as it looks, you'll see," he answered. When he finished saddling the beast, he turned to her. "You'll sit on Romeo's back with both of your legs to the left. Come, let me show you." She walked closer to him, and he easily lifted her up and placed her on the beast's back, with both of her legs hanging on the left side. Riley noticed the panic on her face and said, "Hold on to the pommel, and I will sit behind you." A second later, Riley was seated behind her with his legs astride the animal. He brought his arms on either side of her body and reached for the reins. Immediately, Barbara could feel the warmth radiating from his body and wished she could scoot forward, but there was no space left. "May we leave?" he asked from behind her, and his warm breath softly caressed the back of her neck. A warm, tingly feeling ran through her body, and she found herself gripping harder on the pommel. "Yes," she answered. Riley kicked the sides of the gelding, and they started on a slow walk. She would bump now and again into his chest, and no matter how strong she held on, their bodies kept colliding. As they rode on, Riley pointed out the chicken coop, the barn, and the cattle enclosures, and every time Barbara thought they were done, Riley would point further out at something else. Finally, unable to hide her curiosity anymore, she asked, "How big is this place?" "About 15,000 acres, he said as a matter of fact. Barbara almost fell off the horse. That was the size of a small town back in New Orleans. There was no way they could cover all that space by lunchtime. "And all of it belongs to you?" she asked. "Well, it belongs to the family, but I'm the only one who shows interest in it," Riley answered. He showed her all the crops he'd planted, explaining what each one was, and after a couple of hours they were both tired. "We should rest a bit and then continue afterward. What do you think?" Riley asked. "Yes, we should. We've been riding for a long time," Barbara answered, happy to take a break. Her backside was beginning to feel sore. Riley led her to a big rock near a small creek which was now frozen, and they sat down. An uneasy silence followed as each waited for the other to speak first. Chapter 16. It's becoming colder. I think we should come back tomorrow and finish the tour then. There is so much I haven't shown you, Riley said. It was true the weather was changing, but he didn't know why he had such a strong urge to see Barbara again. I have never been on a ranch before. Are they all this huge? Barbara asked. She was still shocked by the fact that the Scotts owned all those acres of land. Yes, most of them are, he replied. He couldn't explain why, but the time he'd spent with Barbara was the most relaxing he'd had in a long time. He felt as if something had changed from the time she'd arrived, and now, it was as if they were two different people. He just couldn't explain it. The horseback ride back home was less uncomfortable, and Barbara had to admit to herself that she couldn't wait to come here the following day with Riley. She had seen a completely different side to him that morning, and she liked it. As Barbara lay in her bed later that night, her mind drifted to the handsome young man. With his guard down that morning, she could tell that he wasn't a bad person. At times, she'd caught him staring into the distance with a faraway look in his eyes. She could sense that he'd suffered a loss, but she wasn't sure what it was. Barbara still had no idea why Riley had asked her to go to the ranch with him. He most probably was just being kind to her. If only they had met the right way, they probably would be married by now, she sighed. Riley's mind was also on Barbara as he tossed and turned in his bed. He had enjoyed spending time with her, and he'd been pleasantly surprised. His mother had been right. Now, all he wanted was to see her again. Perhaps he could ask what her plans were and whether she was still planning to move back home. His mother had given him a week to make up his mind about Barbara, but he no longer needed it. He wanted her to stay. As soon as he admitted that to himself, he was immediately filled with guilt. Was he already forgetting Tammy? Was letting himself be vulnerable betraying the love he had for his late wife? On her deathbed, he'd vowed never to love another woman as much as he'd loved her, and he had hoped to keep that promise. But at only 22 years old, he was realizing now that it was not possible. Marie was surprised the following morning at breakfast when Riley walked into the living room, a big smile plastered on his lips. It had been ages since she'd seen her son that happy, and oh, how handsome he looked. "Good morning, Mother. Miss Morris hasn't come down, I see," he observed. "Not yet, son. She hasn't, but she shouldn't be long now. Why do you ask?" his mother asked. "We didn't finish our ranch tour yesterday. The weather didn't favor us, and we made plans to go back today." Riley answered, "I had no idea. That secret was kept from me," Marie said, pretending to be offended. "It's no secret, Mother. We just didn't see the need to tell you is all," Riley answered. As they went on to talk about other matters, Barbara walked into the room looking as radiant as ever. Riley could hardly take his eyes off of her as she went to sit next to Marie. Agatha served their breakfast and they ate in silence, each engrossed in their own thoughts. "I still can't get over the size of this ranch," Barbara said as they sat on the same rock they had been on the day before. "You haven't seen anything yet. It's very beautiful during spring," Riley said before he caught himself. "It's unfortunate that I won't be here at that time," Barbara said, her gaze on the ground. "What if I ask you to stay?" Riley said and looked into her eyes. This time she didn't look away. "Would you?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Barbara. Will you please stay?" he asked and took her hand in his. She didn't pull away. "Yes, Riley, I'd love to," she answered with a smile. This was the first time she had said his name out loud, and it felt good. At that moment, nothing else existed but the two of them as they stared into each other's eyes. Riley felt as if he was getting lost in her blue eyes, and he slowly leaned over and kissed her softly on the lips. He then quickly pulled away, lest somebody saw them. There would be plenty of time once they were married, he mused. Romeo neighed happily next to them, as if the beast could understand what was happening. "I think we should tell Mother when we return home," Riley said, still holding Barbara's hand. "Yes, I agree," she said. He scooted over, and she instinctively laid her head on his chest. He ran his fingers through her hair, marveling at its scent. Barbara thought she heard Bailey whisper in her ear that everything was now going to be okay. Marie couldn't contain her tears when Riley told her that Barbara was staying and he wanted to go ahead and marry her. "Don't worry about anything, my darlings. I will take care of everything," she gushed. "I could help if you need me," Barbara offered, but Marie shook her head vigorously. "No. I'll have none of that. Leave everything to me," I said, she said with finality. And both Barbara and Riley laughed. Chapter 17. Barbara and Riley were married 2 days later in a private ceremony at the local church, witnessed by family and close friends. Natalie, Ryan's wife, had lent Barbara her old wedding dress, and it fit the new bride like a glove. After having given birth to 2 children, Natalie could no longer fit in the dress, and when she saw Barbara in it, she was hit by a sudden wave of nostalgia. "You still look as good as you did back then, honey," Ryan reassured his wife when he noticed the look in her eyes. "Thanks, love. I know you're just saying that to make me feel better," she replied with a smile. "She does look lovely. Riley owes you one." "You should tell him that. He almost bit my head off when he realized I was in on the arrangement with Mother," Ryan replied, and they both laughed. After the ceremony, the guests were invited back to the ranch, where a sumptuous buffet awaited them. Later on, they were allowed to leave at their own discretion as the evening became colder. Riley took his wife by the hand and led her away from the others. "I noticed you've been looking sad since we left the church. Are you regretting marrying me?" he asked. "No, this has been the best day of my life. I've been wishing that a very special person in my life would have been here," she replied. "I know they're very proud of you wherever they are." "Do you think this person would have liked me?" Riley teased her. "Oh, this person would have loved you dearly. I haven't any doubt about it," she answered. "Then that's all that matters. Let's get back to our guests," Riley said, and they walked back into the house. Barbara settled into married life beautifully. Marie doted on her while Riley tried his best to satisfy her every whim. Riley had finally told her about his late wife, and Barbara could now understand why he seemed sad and aloof at times. She felt the same emotions whenever she thought about Bailey. But a week later, things took a drastic turn. Riley kept mentioning Tammy in all their conversations, and Barbara began to feel uneasy. It was as if Riley thought he'd got married to Tammy all over again, and Barbara was just a person who lived in the same house and slept in the same bed with him. "Would you like to come with me to cut the Christmas tree?" Riley asked one evening as they sat by the fireplace after dinner. Marie and Agatha had gone off to bed, leaving them alone. "Yes, I would love to. I've never done that," she replied happily. "He must be coming around." "Tammy and I," he started, but then went quiet. "You can talk about her to me. I don't mind," Barbara said, hoping to ease her husband's worries and fears. "It's okay. I'd rather not talk about her with you," he replied, and his gaze went back to the fire. Barbara wondered what her husband meant by that statement, but decided not to give it much thought. "I think this one looks good enough," Barbara said after they'd looked at Christmas trees the whole afternoon. She was hungry and tired. "No, Tammy wouldn't have liked that one," Riley blurted out, to Barbara's astonishment. "Riley, Tammy is not here. I am, and I think this tree is okay," she replied, beginning to get angry. "You should have stayed at home if all you're going to do is whine," he retorted. "I've been whining? We've been looking for a Christmas tree that you think your late wife would have approved of." "Riley, Tammy is dead," she said, and immediately regretted it. She could see that she had hurt his feelings, but how else was she going to make him understand that his late wife was just that, gone? "Let's go home," he growled and began to walk away. "Riley, but we haven't chosen a tree," she said, hot on his heels. "Maybe we don't need one after all," he said, and climbed onto his side of the cart, leaving Barbara to her own devices. The silence in the cart as they rode home was deafening. Barbara kept fighting tears, but Riley seemed unconcerned. Was he really ready to marry her? Did he even like her anymore? All he did lately was to compare her with his dead wife, and Barbara was at her wits' end. She felt worse than when she found out that she had been in correspondence with Ryan and not Riley. Every time she thought that things were finally falling into place, something would happen, and she would be left feeling worse than before. The following morning after breakfast, Riley was still upset about the tree, and he left the table without talking to his wife. Marie sat quietly watching them, and she could see the old Riley slowly begin to come back. "What's wrong with him?" she asked Barbara, who looked like she was close to tears. "I'm afraid he's not the same person I married a week ago. Something has changed in him. All he does is talk about Tammy and what she would and wouldn't like. I'm completely invisible to him," she sobbed. "I'm sure it can't be as bad as you're making it out to be," Marie said to the distraught girl. She didn't want to admit it in front of Barbara, but she was also getting worried about her son. "It's bad, ma'am, and I don't think I can live like this. Maybe he wasn't ready to get married after all," she said. "Calm down, child, I will talk to him," Marie said. "I doubt it will do any good. I think it's best if I left this place. I have tried, but I don't think I truly belong here," she cried. "No, don't say that. There has to be something we can do," Marie said, but even she didn't have any idea how Riley could be helped. Chapter 18. The more Ryan listened to his mother talk, the more he realized that Riley was truly sick. His marriage to Barbara could have triggered something in his brain, and that's why he was always talking about his deceased wife. "Mother, we shouldn't have forced him to get married when he wasn't ready," Ryan said. "I think you're right, son. I'm to blame for the situation he's in now," Marie said. "And not forgetting Barbara, who's suffering just as much, if not more." Ryan said, "Yes, she's been threatening to leave for quite some time now. Only her love for Riley is keeping her here. She keeps hoping and praying that whatever is ailing he would let go of him," Marie said. "I have an idea of someone who can help him. Katakana, the local herbalist," he said. "I will fetch him from their village tomorrow." "Let's try whatever we can. I can't lose my son," Marie cried. The following evening, Ryan came to the house accompanied by the herbalist. Ryan had explained Riley's illness to the man using an interpreter, and the man had said that he knew how he could cure him. They led him straight to Barbara and Riley's bedroom, where they found him sitting at his writing desk. "Who's this, and what is he doing inside my room?" Riley asked, appraising the man from head to toe. "This is Katakana, and he's here to help you," Ryan said, and Riley looked angrily at him. "I'm okay. I don't need any help. Please leave my room," Riley said, and his brother knew that there would be no convincing him. As they piled out of the bedroom, the herbalist took Ryan's hand, placed a small vial containing some liquid in it, and gestured drinking signs. Ryan knew instantly what they were meant to do. "Agatha, you'll pour all the contents in this bottle into Riley's coffee tonight," Ryan instructed the housekeeper, who nodded her understanding. When Riley woke up the following morning, he had a splitting headache, and he couldn't remember the events of the last couple of days. Barbara wasn't on her side of the bed, and in a panic, he got out of bed and ran down the stairs, still in his nightshirt. Marie and Barbara were having breakfast, and they looked up in shock when he dashed in. "My love," he said as he wrapped his arms around his wife in her seat. "What happened? Why can't I remember anything?" Marie broke into a big smile as soon as she realized what was happening. The medicine had worked, and the old Riley was back. "My head hurts so much," he complained. "You should go back to bed and lie down. We will explain everything when you're feeling better," Marie said. "Yes, you should go and lie down. Remember, tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and we have a lot to do," Barbara said. "Like what?" he asked, rubbing his aching temples. "Ryan and his family will be spending Christmas Day here at the ranch with us." "We haven't gotten gifts yet," she replied. "In that case, let me go and have a lie down. We will go to Elmo when I wake up and buy everything you need," he said, and walked back the way he'd come. Marie and Barbara looked at each other and smiled. It was all coming together, and they had a feeling that this year's Christmas was the best one yet. Epilogue. You had really asked for a pair of boots, and instead, Ryan and Mother brought you a bride for Christmas? Barbara laughed after Riley finished telling her the story. "Yes, that's all I wanted. But I'm happy they brought you instead," he replied. "Had I known I was coming to be given to another person, I wouldn't have ever left New Orleans. But then again, I would have never met you," Barbara said. So I guess it's safe to say we all got what we wanted in the end, he said. I guess so, she replied. When do you think we should tell Mother? Barbara asked. I'll leave that decision to you, Riley replied. 2 years later, Barbara and Riley were still happily married, and Riley hadn't suffered another episode concerning his late wife, Tammy. Every year, he and Barbara placed fresh flowers on Tammy's grave, and that gave Riley a lot of comfort. This morning, they were eagerly waiting for their mother to walk into the living room as they had great news to share with her. Marie was getting on with age, and she was no longer as agile as she had been 2 years ago. Here I am. What made you get me out of bed this early? She complained as she walked inside. Come now, Mother. It's nearly 9 o'clock, Riley shot back. Okay, here I am. Out with it, she said lightly. Well, do you think you could knit us a baby shawl? Maybe before 8 months are over, Riley said. Of course, what do you need it for? She asked, and then it hit her. What? Yes, Mother, we are going to have a baby after waiting for almost 2 years, Riley said, and then he noticed that his mother was in tears. Mother, this is a good thing. Why are you crying? There's no other way I can express my joy, she said as Barbara stood up, went over to her, and placed her arms around her. You've been by our side through it all, Mother. Guess what? If it's a girl, I'm going to name her Marie, Barbara said. What do you think? I think that will be wonderful, she answered. If it's a boy, we will name him Ken, Riley said, and his mother nodded again. Have you two realized something else? Marie asked. No, what? Barbara asked. 8 months from now will fall in December. We're going to have a Christmas baby next year, she exclaimed. Yet another Christmas miracle awaited them the following year.